How to language learn by listening to podcasts. So basically, I'm not going to waste your time. Listening is an extremely important part of language learning, and many learners do struggle with finding something to actually listen to improve in that language. And you've definitely worried about, I've written you've probably worried, I think you've definitely worried if you're actually making progress in a language before, and a big part of that is with the content you consume. So basically, in this video, I'm going to explain to you how to make progress in your language by listening to podcasts that you enjoy. If you don't enjoy podcasts, maybe still stick around for the first part of this video, but this video might not be for you. But yeah, I'm basically just going to show you how you can make progress in the listening aspect of language learning, which is something a lot of people have problems with. So yeah, if you do like this kind of educational content on language learning as well, guys, hit the subscribe button and let's go. So first, do you have to listen to podcasts to get good at a language? The answer is no, you don't have to listen to podcasts. If you hate podcasts, if you just, you don't have any podcasts you like listening to, that's fine. You don't have to listen to podcasts. However, some form of listening is definitely important. So if you don't want to listen to podcasts, but you do want to learn a language, you're going to have to listen to something, be that audiobook, movie/TV, news, even just talking to someone. If you have someone you can consistently talk to, like someone in your house, and I guess that would be good as well. But yeah, some form of listening is essential for language learning. So if you like podcasts, that can definitely be what you listen to. So the two problems that you would run into when you are, trying to find a podcast to listen to improve your language learning ability is one, what podcasts you should be listening to, as in difficulty, what it's about, that kind of thing. And two, how to actually listen to the podcast to get better at understanding, because there's different ways to listen to things, just that there's different ways to read things. And yeah, that is very important. So both of these can be difficult, but they are actually really easy to explain. So definitely stick around because I will help you with that. So yeah, first of all, I'm getting a drink before I explain this. All right, what podcast? So the answer is simple. Pick a podcast in your target language that has two things. One, it's not too hard for you, and two, it's about something that interests you. Reason for this is because if the podcast is too hard, you're going to get really bored and probably stop listening to it. So yeah, and if it's too easy, you're not really going to learn anything. So when you're looking for a podcast in your target language, what you can search is easy podcasts in X for beginners, where X is the language you're learning. And you can search that on Google, but you can also search it on YouTube, because some YouTubers might have a video where they talk about all their favorite podcasts. That might actually be better than Googling it, because it's a person explaining what is actually in each podcast. So yeah, do either of those, or you can also search slow X podcasts for beginners, like slow Italian podcasts for beginners, something like that. And they have podcasts where people deliberately talk slower for beginners. So yeah, literally anything like either of those two search strings, you can chuck any of them into Google or YouTube and find podcasts that work for you and just give them a try. And yeah, just literally find that list of podcasts and pick one that interests you. Try listening to it. If you like it, keep listening to it. If you don't like it, don't listen to it. Basically like that. I'll just say that's all of that is mostly addressing like the podcast, how to find a podcast that interests you. As far as the difficulty, listening is quite difficult. It's definitely, in my opinion, more difficult than reading. So even the easiest podcast, for example, if you're listening to, like the slow Italian news, for example, is one that I've listened to before. As a beginner, you probably will find that still fairly difficult, just because listening is difficult. So at least try and pick out a few words. If you can pick out words like the, and, that kind of thing, even if the podcast is really hard, you don't really know what's going on, you can still listen to it, that's fine. It's mostly if it's ridiculously fast and it's blending into like nothing, then it's probably too hard. It's kind of hard to describe what's too hard. As far as listening goes, you can actually listen to a podcast and understand basically none of it, and you'll still find you get better over time. I remember listening to podcasts when I was learning Italian and understanding none of it. And over time, I would just get better, because your brain would just work at a faster rate when it's translating into English and that kind of thing. So yeah, don't stress if you have literally no idea what's happening in that episode of the podcast. Just keep listening. You will make progress. If you listen to it, 20 minutes a day, you will literally find after a week you'll be like 1% better. Like you'll realize it, trust me. So yeah, podcasts I recommend as well. Obviously, I haven't listened to every single podcast in every single language, so I can't just make a list of every podcast that you should listen to. However, I can kind of recommend what to listen to. So there are some podcasts that combine English and the foreign language you're learning. For example, Coffee Break is one. They have it in a few different languages. Like I think they have it in French, Italian, and Spanish. They probably have it in more than that. I don't know. But yeah, basically what they do is they talk in the foreign language, but they also talk in English. And not only that, but they do kind of address things, so they might be talking about a specific problem in the language. So not only are you hearing them speak in the other language, but they are also like kind of explaining problems you might have as a beginner, which I think can be really useful. So yeah, you can look up Coffee Break and see if they have it in the language you're learning. If you want a podcast that isn't at all in English, like Coffee Break, 100% in the foreign languages, all languages have the news, but a lot of languages have the news in slow. So for example, you could look up the news in slow Italian. I presume they have the news in slow French or basically any other language, and you can listen to the news and it's someone speaking slowly. If you don't want to listen to the news, you can look up, as I said before, some X podcasts for beginners, so slow Russian podcasts, slow Japanese podcasts for beginners, and just try and find one that speaks at kind of a slower rate if you want. Yeah, anything like that. Many language learning YouTubers also have their own podcasts. It's something you guys might not know. So if you had a complete brain melt there. If you already have a kind of language learning YouTuber you like, you can try and see if they have a podcast. They might not, but a lot of them do. They might surprise you. So yeah, that could be useful as well. Overall, just find something you can listen to. Even if you can understand 5% of it, that's fine. I promise you, you will get better. And yeah, that is how to find a podcast. That was what podcast to listen to. How do you listen to it though, in a way that helps you actually get better at it? Another kind of tricky question, but it is straightforward. So there are two ways basically to get better at listening by listening to podcasts, or anything really, but we're talking about podcasts in this video. So the first thing you can do is literally just listen. So just like how I've talked about reading extensively in my How to Learn vocab video, I have that pop up on the screen right now. You should definitely check that out as well if you haven't watched it. Just like how you would read something in another language and just read for pleasure, even if you don't understand all of it, you can do the same with listening. So basically, you can chuck the podcast on while you're exercising, running, walking, cleaning, any other kind of task where you would listen to something at the same time. And even though you're not picking over the words, looking at the transcript as you're listening to it, that kind of thing, and even though you're not fully dedicating your attention to it because you're listening to it while you're cleaning or whatever, you will still get slightly better at the language just through kind of exposure. So just by listening to it, as I said before, you will get better at it. You will kind of understand it more. Just like how if you had a podcast in English on while you were cleaning, you would basically understand all of it. You will slowly get better just by having it in your ear. The other thing you can do, which will help you learn words quicker, is to actually, kind of listen intently. So if you were doing it the second way, you would be listening to the podcast, but you wouldn't be doing anything else. You would be focusing. And what you would be doing is called the input repetition method. That's what IRM stands for then. I have talked about that as well in the video that just popped up on the screen with the How to Learn vocab. So yeah, I would highly recommend you check that out after this. But basically, the input repetition method is where you consume some kind of content, be it, books, a podcast, literally anything. You make a list of all the words you don't know, a vocab list, and then you put it into flashcards and memorize it. And that's how you learn words. So if you were to do this second way of actually studying per se the podcast, you would listen to it like an episode or 5 minutes, however much time you want to set yourself. Then you would go back and you would, ideally there's a transcript of the podcast so you can easily pick out words you don't know, or you could just listen to it again and kind of write down all the words. Just figure out a way of making a vocab list and then translate them all with Google Translate, or if they have an English transcript and a foreign language transcript, that would be really useful, and put it all into flashcards and learn it. And then when you go back and listen to it again, yes, it'll still be difficult because, listening is hard, but you will understand more of the words. So yeah, that is how you can actually build up a vocabulary. Both of these are good. If you want to learn words faster, number 2 will build up your vocabulary faster. Number 1 is probably more enjoyable. I would recommend you do both. And in fact, you can actually do both with the same podcast. You can listen to it extensively, like for fun, just listen. Then you can go back and study it, learn all the words, and then you can go back and listen to it again and just see how you went, that kind of thing. So yeah, don't stress too much. Overall, I would just say number 1 tip, just do more. Just increase the volume. Listen to more podcasts. Dedicate, 20 minutes a day if you can. Everyone should really be exercising every single day or walking somewhere, so you can have that on in the background. Even if you're not listening to it that well, that's fine. You're still making progress. So yeah, bottom line, if you do enjoy listening to podcasts, finding one in your target language, the foreign language you're learning, will definitely provide a huge boost to your language learning progress. particularly if you do enjoy that podcast, because you'll be kind of invested in learning it. So yeah, and also, even if you only understand a fraction of it, that's absolutely fine. If you do like this video, guys, please drop a like and subscribe. It does really help the channel. It makes me feel good about all the time I'm putting for free. If you have any questions or comments or tips and tricks of your own, comment them down below. Actually, I always respond to most comments, unless they're just weird comments, then I try and ignore them so I don't get roped into whatever weird stuff people are trying to talk about. But yeah, Discord in the description as well, guys, if you want to friend me, talk in private about language learning, that kind of thing. Check out my website as well. And yeah, have a good one. Thanks for listening. Cheers.